Hi, I am Michael Santos with Prison Professors, and I'm really glad that you're back with lesson number 2 because preparing for success after prison is a methodical strategy, and I want to share the lessons that I learned today. We are going to be reading from our course called our lesson number 2, which is right here on my screen, called Attitude and Aspiration. And what that means, you've really got to have the right attitude, and you've got to see yourself not where you are, but rather what you can become, the best possible outcome. You will have already defined success and understand how to set goals, as we described in the previous lesson. But now we're going to talk about having the right attitude and making sure that you aspire to something better. So let me read. I will turn to the questions at the end as I did the last time, just to give you my response. No right answer, no wrong answer. I want you working on yourself. So here we go. Once we define success and set clear goals, we need to, what do we got here? We need to pursue success with the right attitude. For our course, we define the right attitude as 100% commitment to success as the individual defines it. That strategy works for people who anticipate a sentencing hearing and for people after sentencing. Aspire to the best possible outcome. And now we're going to talk about my friend Halim Flowers. And again, stick around to the end because I'm going to give you a little bit of extra insight on Halim. Halim Flowers is now one of our nation's most celebrated artists, writers, and activists. But that isn't how he started his life. Like many people who go through the criminal justice system, Halim began his life in struggle. Street gangs influenced his adolescent years. Before he turned 10, he walked across puddles of blood that oozed from a dead person. Neither gunshots nor seeing death fazed him. His father became addicted to crack cocaine. Conditioned by his environment, Halim started selling crack at 12, adapting to life on the streets and housing projects of Washington, D.C. Now, most children his age have positive role models and learn in school, preparing them to live as productive adults. Their lives reflect what they see around them. Unlike other teenagers, Halim didn't grow up with the opportunities and privileges that so many people take for granted. His behavior mirrored what he saw, and by the time he turned 16, he had to start preparing for sentencing and prison. Authorities charged him with gang-related crimes. After judicial proceedings concluded, Halim had to cope with the plight of 2 life sentences. What does it mean to serve double life? Since a judge sentenced him to serve a term with letters rather than numbers, authorities sent Halim into high-security penitentiaries. He stepped inside the walls before being old enough to vote. While incarcerated, Halim made a commitment. Despite starting his sentence at 16, he had the wisdom to know that he didn't like his environment. People convicted of crimes surrounded him. Those people tried to influence his adjustment, giving him a message that permeates every jail and prison in America. The best way to serve time is to forget about the world outside and to focus on time inside. It is tough to start serving a sentence under those conditions. Prison can obliterate hope. Few people know what it's like to live with the following challenges. Being born into an environment that doesn't abound with positive role models. Being influenced by gangs and crime before knowing how to decipher the consequences of decisions. Being separated from a mother at 16. Learning that a federal judge imposed 2 life sentences. Hearing that the system doesn't offer any way out. And here's where we offer some self-directed questions. We ask you to write responses. Remember, no right answer, no wrong answer. How would you expect a person with Halim's background to adjust inside the penitentiary? In what ways would you expect his life to be different after 20 years in prison? What would be the best possible outcome for a person with Halim's background? Or at least what would you say would be the best possible outcome for a person with Halim's background? Despite the challenges of Halim's backstory, he had an attitude of self-empowerment. He didn't like the backstory of illiteracy, poverty, drug abuse, and a pipeline that would carry children from school playgrounds to the penitentiary. Rather than complain, he found a way to write a new chapter in his life story. He wanted to make a difference that would lead to a better community. Halim coined a phrase, "Love is the antidote." As he moved through his sentence, he developed his mind and understanding of the world by reading. Through reading, he trained himself to become a better communicator. He learned to put words into sentences and sentences into paragraphs. Over time, he authored several books, including A Reason to Breathe, Mind Over Matter, What Our Fathers Never Told Us, Makings of a Menace, Buried Alive, Time, How to Do It and Not Let It Do You, For Young Offenders, Be Great Wherever You Are, Niggernomics, What Blacks Must Know About Money, and A Reason to Breathe. Knowing the importance of using many mediums to communicate, Halim also taught himself how to paint. With words and pictures, Halim worked to help others see the pain that comes when society shackles a boy's soul in chains. Despite living in cages, as years turned into decades, knowing that he did not have a release date, he learned to master the use of words and pictures. By communicating, he could take steps that would lead to liberty. He wrote books and converted ideas into images, transcending prison boundaries, influencing others to believe in him. Mechanisms didn't exist to change his life sentence. Yet Halim's attitude gave him the fuel to keep working toward his aspirations. In time, he wanted to make a difference. Through his work, he could contribute to ending intergenerational cycles of poverty. Like Mahatma Gandhi, Halim Flowers aspired to live as the change that he wanted to see. He gives us an example of what it means to live with the audacity of hope, believing that with the right attitude, he could be more than the label of super predator that society had bestowed upon him when he was only a boy. He made a 100% commitment to that end. Leaders inspired him, but inspiration without action is fantasy. Halim gives us an example of excellence. If a person has the right attitude, and if a person aspires toward the best outcome, perseverance and commitment can bend the arc toward justice. By the time that Halim served 22 years, the law changed. Those changes allowed a federal judge to take another look at injustice. The judge agreed that, based on Halim's extraordinary and compelling adjustment, a double life sentence no longer served the interests of justice. In 2019, after 22 years in prison, Halim returned to court. During the second hearing, he walked out of the courtroom to begin his life as a successful artist, writer, and activist. And here we go to take 10 minutes. We're asking you to write responses to the following questions. Number 4, what role would you say that Halim's attitude at the start of his sentence had on his eventual release? 5, in what ways would you say that Halim's aspiration fueled his adjustment? Number 6, in what ways could a story like Halim's influence your preparation for sentencing? Again, at the end of the lesson, I will respond to those questions. But what's more important is for you to respond. Think about them and develop stronger critical thinking skills. Attitudes, aspirations, and sentencing. Halim is a special kind of human being. Intuitively, soon after authorities locked him in prison as a teenager, he had an idea of what success should look like for him. Then he set clear goals that would lead him to become a better communicator. Over time, he trained himself to write books, to launch a publishing company, and to paint pictures that would help others see what they did not see previously. By the time an opportunity opened for him to go through a new sentencing hearing, Halim had a new story. The judge responded by releasing him from the injustice of a double life sentence. Few people go into sentencing hearing with the preparations that Halim made during the 22 years that he served. Taking the long view requires patience, commitment, and the right attitude. Even people who face relatively short sentences, and anything is short compared to a life sentence, they tend to think about themselves in the immediate moment rather than what they can become over time. That is understandable. They're about to lose their liberty. The concept of being separated from all that a person loves can feel surreal. Yet even people facing short sentences can learn a great deal from Halim's story. They can think about the different people that they are going to encounter and figure out a strategy to influence perceptions. We tend to view our lives from the limited perspective of how we see ourselves. Yet others may see us differently from the way that we see ourselves. When I went through the criminal justice process, I had the wrong attitude because I didn't know how to think differently. Instead of thinking about the realities that follow for people facing sentencing, I should have been thinking about the people I would face in the future. Many people would have enormous discretion over my future. Rather than coming up with a deliberate, intentional plan to influence those decision makers, I thought about how the sentence would influence my life. Later, by reading influential books, I began to see a different perspective. For example, I remember a book that changed my perspective. I don't recall the book's name, but I remember it taught me the concept of the Johari window. With the Johari window, people learn to understand their relationship with themselves and others. Psychologists use the concept of the Johari window in self-help groups. Anyone preparing for sentencing may want to consider lessons from the Johari window teachings. Start by thinking of a quadrant with 2 columns and 2 rows as follows. We're seeing the quadrant now on the screen. Known to self in the left column, unknown to self in the right column. In the top row, we see the open area. The open quadrant is that part of our conscious self that we're aware of and that is known to others. Anyone can assess our attitude, behavior, motivations, values, and way of life. In preparing for sentencing, we can be certain that prosecutors and the judge are assessing us. That quadrant is called the open area, known to others and known to self. Then we have the unknown to self, but known to others. This is the blind area. And this quadrant represents what others perceive in us, but that we do not think about when thinking of ourselves. Although we may see ourselves as being good people, when authorities charge us with crimes, we should consider the likelihood that they're looking at us as being bad people. Again, that is the blind quadrant. It's unknown to us, but known to others. Then we go to the left column, bottom row, which is known to self, not known to others. And this is the facade. It's the facade that we see projected many times in jails and prisons across America. In this quadrant, despite what we know about ourselves, others do not see it. For example, we may think of ourselves as being remorseful, yet prosecutors or the judge may not think that we're remorseful. They think it's just a facade. And the other quadrant, finally, is the unknown to self, but not known to others either, known as the unknown quadrant. This quadrant includes all that neither others know about us nor that we know about ourselves. Who knows what we will be in the days, months, years, or decades ahead? For example, who could have predicted that Halim would become something special when he left prison, when he went into prison at 16 and didn't get out until until 22 years later? Using this framework of the Johari window before sentencing can influence a person's attitude and aspirations. Instead of living with delusions, we can prepare for reality. Those who love us may know the real us, but we would be naive to believe that our adversaries will see us in the same way. If we want to prepare for the best possible outcome at sentencing, we need to go into the proceeding with the right attitude and with the right aspiration. We need to think about the obstacles we face today and the strategies we can create to prepare for a better tomorrow. If a person does not take appropriate steps before sentencing, the only record that will exist will be the documents that describe our crime. To influence a better outcome, we can use Johari's window to consider questions that will help us prepare. And here we have those questions. Here are some open questions. In what ways do you see yourself? How or why would the prosecutor or judge know this about you? What steps can you take to help the prosecutor or judge know this about you? We have some blind questions. What motivated the prosecutor or judge to pursue his position? How does the prosecutor or judge define success? In what ways does the prosecutor or judge view you? Then we have some facade questions. When the prosecutor or judge meets with others in his profession, how do they think about people like you? What common traits do you have with other people the prosecutor or judge must assess? In what ways does the prosecutor believe you are unaware or unrealistic about how you see yourself? And finally, the unknown questions. What influences in your future are neither you nor your prosecutor or judge considering? In what ways does your behavior show that you are contemplating such unknowns? What motivates your prosecutor or judge to want to deny you your request for special consideration? These kinds of questions should help us build the right attitude and aspiration as we face a sentencing hearing. We don't only want to think about consequences we must face for the decisions we made. We also want to think about how others will perceive us. Then we need to create a strategy that will put us in a better position to succeed. Regardless of what stage we're in on the journey through the criminal justice system, we will encounter people who do not know us, yet they will judge us based on what government officials or media reports have written to describe us. To the extent we can think about our challenges, we can put ourselves on pathways toward better outcomes. The sooner a person starts to contemplate these realities, the more effective the person becomes in preparing for success. Now here's a personal story. While locked inside a solitary cell, I awaited my sentencing date. After a year of trial proceedings, a jury found me guilty on every count. Anticipating a lengthy sentence, I needed to make sense of all the ways my life had gone wrong. When DEA agents arrested me in 1987, I didn't know how to think from the perspective of others. I had never heard of Johari's window. All I knew was that I hated being in confinement and I wanted out. I had a natural inclination to think about myself and all I was losing. Everyone in law enforcement, on the other hand, thought about the crimes I committed and the victims of my crime. In that early frame of mind, I had the wrong attitude. I argued that my crime didn't have any victims. A group of consenting adults paid to purchase cocaine from a group of people that I influenced. I hoped for the lowest possible sentence, but I didn't do the work to prepare for the lowest possible sentence. While I languished in the solitary cell, a correctional officer began bringing books that he said would change my thoughts. I knew him as Officer Wilson, one of the kindest officers in the detention center. He could see something in me that I could not see in myself. Besides passing me books on Frederick Douglass, he gave me an anthology on philosophy. I didn't know the meaning of philosophy at that time, but he assured me that I could learn from reading the lessons in the books he brought. To create meaning in my life from prison, I needed to learn how to think differently. Instead of perseverating on how I could get out early, I needed to change my attitude and aspiration. The books that Officer Wilson provided opened my eyes to a different way of thinking. I read about Socrates, a man who lived more than 2,500 years ago. Ordinarily, such a story wouldn't have interested me. In reading the first paragraph of the story on Socrates, I learned that he was in a jail cell, awaiting the day when authorities would carry out a death sentence for a crime he committed. I wouldn't have read the book or the story about Socrates previously because I neither identified with the concept of philosophy nor did I have any interest in history. Sometimes we get the message we need at the right time. The story spoke to me because I faced life in prison. Facing life in prison felt as if I faced a death sentence because I could potentially die in prison. I needed a better attitude, and I needed to aspire to something bigger than my life. That story about Socrates helped me to learn that I had been living by a bad philosophy. Fortunately, it is never too early and it is never too late to begin making better decisions. After reading that story, I began to contemplate the different ways that I could make sense of my journey. I realized that I could not change the past. I already broke the law. A jury convicted me. A judge would sentence me. I would go to prison. Like Halim Flowers, I would have to confront the challenges ahead. My attitude would influence whether I wasted time in prison or whether I used that time to reconcile with society and make amends. In preparing before sentencing, I needed to convey a message. I wanted stakeholders to know that, going forward, I would make disparate decisions than I had made before my arrest. I intended to work towards something bigger than my own life. The prosecutor responded to my proclamations of remorse by telling the judge, if Michael Santos spends every day of his life in an all-consuming effort to repay society, and if he lives to be 300 years old, our society will still be at a significant net loss. The federal judge presiding over my case sentenced me to 45 years. Fortunately, reading the story about Socrates helped me to process the sentence imposed. I'll paraphrase an ancient fable that can help us come to terms with the challenges we face. A scorpion asks a frog to carry him over the river. The frog initially refuses, claiming its fear of being stung. The scorpion argues that if it stung the frog, they both would die because the frog would sink, drowning the scorpion. The frog then agrees. Midway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog, dooming them both. As they started to drown, the frog asked the scorpion why he stung him. The scorpion replied that it's in the nature of the scorpion to sting. Well, the prosecutor's nature is to ask for a lengthy sentence. The judge's nature is to impose a term that will protect the interests of society, not to make things easier on the person convicted of breaking the law. Like Halim, I could choose how to respond to the sentence. My attitude going forward would determine my aspirations. And that is the conclusion of the lesson. I leave that there on the screen just for a moment, our mailing address in case somebody wants to write to us. If they have the email, they'll want to send the email to interns@prisonprofessorstalent.com. But let me go back and just briefly touch on those questions that we asked. I don't have to answer them all. I just want to give you a sense of how I would have been thinking while I was going through that very difficult stage in my life. The stage that many people who are working through these lessons may be going through right now. I really encourage you to be thinking about your future, about what the prosecutor's objective is and what the judge's objective is and what your objective is. Because if you understand what's important to you, and if you understand the challenges you're facing, you will be in a much better position to argue for leniency. So let me turn to the questions. There they are on the screen. I'm just going to zip through them relatively quickly. And I'll just take it off the screen there and just start reading here on a bigger screen. So how would you expect a person with Haleem's background to adjust inside the penitentiary? Frankly, I think that person typically would adjust in a very negative way. That person would likely associate with the wrong people in prison, people that could get him into further problems and expose him to challenges with authority. Why do I think that? Well, because I served 26 years in prison. And I know a lot of young people go into the system not thinking about preparing for success upon release, but instead they focus on trying to build a reputation in prison. In what ways would you expect his life to be different after 20 years in prison? Well, I mean, I would hope that a person would emerge as Haleem, and I promised you that I would share my screen and see if I could find something that shows a little bit about him. So while I'm doing this, I will, while I'm answering that question, what ways would you expect his life to be different after 20 years in prison? Let me see if I could find his website on the, there he is. Number one comes up on Google when I type his name. And if I click on his website, hopefully you can see it. It's really quite extraordinary, the life that he's lived. This poor young fella who started his life in prison when he was only 16 years old. But look at him now. He's just really quite an inspiring figure. You can see his artwork. You could see why a judge considered him extraordinary and compelling and allowed him to leave prison even though he was serving a life sentence. And he is now not only an activist and an artist, but you could see he's featured by some of the most influential organizations in the world. He travels the world. He is the real deal, and I'm super proud to call him a friend and also a sponsor of the Prison Professors program. But that isn't what I would have expected of a guy facing who served 20 years in prison. He's just a special person. And do you know who else is a special person? You're a special person. You can choose every day how you want to spend your time and what you can do to be better. So I hope that you follow in the pathway of Haleem and you have an aspiration set on what's better in your life and you move forward with 100% commitment. That's what the right attitude is all about. What would you say would be the best possible outcome for a person with Haleem's background? It'd probably be serving the rest of his life in prison unless the person chooses to be extraordinary and compelling. This is a guy that wrote 11 books while he was in prison. He became a master artist. You could become something special as well, but it won't happen by accident, and it won't happen with happy talk. Let's turn to the next question. What role would you say that Haleem's attitude at the start of his sentence had on his eventual release? I would say it had a massive influence. Haleem knew he wanted to do better, so he chose the right friends. He pursued the right activities. He avoided activities that could lead to disciplinary infraction. He lived as if he was the CEO of his life, even though he was serving double life. 5. In what ways would you say that Haleem's aspiration fueled his adjustment? In order to stay self-directed and motivated while serving double life, a person has to be focused. He has to see something better. And I interviewed Haleem on for another project that I'm doing. Let me see if I could find that interview where he's responding to some questions. So I'm going to go to another website here. I'm going to go to prisonprofessorstalent.com, which is a website that you should have your family visit because it's something you could participate in. And let me turn to this story of Halim. I'll share my screen again now that I've got it up. And there you see this screen. This is where I'm teaching inside of jails and prisons. That's in the state of Texas. But I go all over the country. It's Sean Hopwood, another former person you'll read about, former prisoner you'll read about. He's now a lawyer. But all of this, what I really want to show you, I can't get you the audio though, but you would see Halim right here as we're sitting in my car. Let me see if it comes up. I thought it was on there. Maybe it's not. Oh, I know where it is. It's on, let me go back. It's on, go back home to this website here. And you can scroll down. This is Halim Flower. These are some of our books, by the way, that I hope you will have access to through the Adovo platform. But this is Halim here. These are guys that you'll read about in our course. Halim, freed after a double life sentence. Adam Flowers, freed after a 213-year sentence. Tommy Walker, freed after a triple life sentence. But here we see Halim in his story and in his artwork, and I was with him together in my car, and I did an interview. I don't know if you could hear this. It's super exciting for me to be with Halim Flowers, somebody that Warden Matavusian introduced me to. He didn't even know he was introducing me to when it happened. But tell him a little bit about what Andy did and then how you and I are connected right now, because I want to send this to the Bureau of Prisons and let them know the impact that he had on changing your life and my life, and how we're going to use this to change hundreds of thousands of people's lives.
So for me, arriving at USP Atwater in the year 2016, December, on the precipice of my release, knowing that I'm getting released but still being sent to a high security institution, I had a prejudgment because a lot of high security institutions are often on lockdown. It's not a lot of educational opportunities. So when I entered the institution and the people were saying that we got this warden, he kind of doing something different. He's kind of leaning into education. I was like, well, that's kind of like up my alley. It's not only am I on my way out, but I have a lifestyle that's committed to learning. I lean into what I don't know. And so having an opportunity to go there, someone to introduce me to Michael Santos' books, told me about the speech he did there, how the warden got him in, how he was there doing classes, and I had the opportunity to access the books, not the classes, but the books. To me, it shows that now all the success that I've accomplished globally, a lot of that was directly on the back end influence by the book that Mike wrote about how he became a millionaire. First, the life story, the love story, him and his wife, the love he had for himself, to value himself to be more than just a drug dealer, but then also the love and support from his spouse, and then the book about how he got out and how he was successful when he got out, and me being on the precipice of getting out and being in the state of California, Atwater. It was just like, it was a divine synchronicity to me. So to have a warden who is a human being that's willing to break the normal protocol of high security, punitive, non-rehabilitative carceral culture, and to take the risk to lean into empowering incarcerated human beings through the opportunity of learning valuable information, in particular allowing someone who just was released from a federal institution the opportunity to come in and teach, I believe was invaluable. And I hope that other directors and wardens, give people like Mike and myself the opportunity to come back in and to share our success and to create curriculums out of it, so that we can scale what him and I have been able to do, so that the world just don't make us exceptional individuals.
So that's really what I love to show, is that regardless of what bad decisions a person may have made at any time, an individual can start pursuing success, and not in mediocrity, but real success. That's what we're striving to teach you how to do with preparing for success after prison. I really want to thank Adovo for giving us an opportunity to work through this program, and I want to thank you. If you've got a family member outside who can look at prison professors, see some of the resources that will help you through this journey, because you've got to be preparing for success every single day. You got to build hope. You got to build energy. You got to find a way to reject the criminal lifestyle and focus on success. But when you're doing your part, we can do our part and work to change the outcomes or build more incentives, hopefully, so that you could work toward earning your freedom. I am Michael Santos. I am the author of Earning Freedom and many other books that I really just want to share with you so that you could reach your highest potential. Thanks so much for being a part of our community, and thanks, Adovo, for letting us communicate with your population.